All Quiet on the Western Front is a film without heroes. It is tragic and profoundly bleak. It is a film devoid of hope, and it might just be the best war movie that I've seen in a very long time. All Quiet on the Western Front is now streaming on Netflix and tells the story of Paul Baumer, a young German soldier on the Western Front of World War I. This film is directed by Edward Berger and is based on the 1929 novel of the same name. Paul, a 17-year-old student, enlists in the German army alongside his similarly aged classmates. Paul is underage but eager to enlist and forges a parent's signature onto his enlistment paperwork in a move that is similar to both historically accurate happenings and propagandized mythology about the patriotism of heroes in fiction. The film briefly lingers on Paul and his friends reveling in their excitement about their newfound roles, cracking jokes and happily marching on their way to the front. This bright, youthful naivety is cut off abruptly once the boys arrive on the front, as the realities of trench warfare quickly reveal themselves. One of Paul's schoolmates, Ludwig, laments that the war is not what he expected it to be. The boys use their helmets to shovel out rainwater from a rapidly filling trench during a torrential downpour. The futility of this act, brown water mostly splashing back in the faces of the soldiers as they attempt to bail out a seemingly unrelenting cascade of rainfall with hopelessly ineffective buckets, is the thesis for this film's message. Artillery fire falls on the men shortly after the rain, and we wait out the barrage alongside Paul and the rest of the soldiers in the shell bunker. Ludwig cries out that he wants to go home. The rest of the men look about nervously as soot shakes out of the bunker under the weight of explosions above. Notably, there's no heroic teeth gritting here, no stoic solemnity, as is thematically common in other war movies. Only the palpable fear of young men afraid to die. This doesn't make the characters feel cowardly, only painfully human. These soldiers were not men of war, lifetime combatants who lived for the fight. They were farmers, cobblers, and largely children. Perpetrators of much violence, these men were also its victims. This film is a meditation on the contradictory nature of war. The nationalistic pride and the boyhood excitement of playing soldier are reserved only for the newest recruits, the fresh-to-the-frontline children playing at war. Paul sees a mass of shadow moving in no man's land while looking out across the battlefield on one of his first nights in the trenches. Excitedly exclaiming that he's about to take his first Frenchman, Paul fires at the shifting figure in the night. A bullet hits the figure. A corpse left on the battlefield. A group of rats scurry from the body, and we realize that the corpse was moving and shifting only by the sheer number of rats consuming it. Paul's belief about the adventurous nature of warfare quickly deteriorate. Intercut into Paul's narrative are several scenes involving General Friedrichs, a bureaucratic officer and self-described career soldier. Friedrichs is seen enjoying curated meals and listening to the faint sounds of warfare from the comfort of his office on high, as he waxes on about the nature and necessity of the war. Friedrichs' delusions about warfare and his staunch nationalism demonstrate him as a character who operates in direct contrast to the needs and desires of his men, who are generally not shown to revel in the violence they inflict. Notably, we also witness tense ceasefire negotiations between German High Command and the Supreme Allied Commander, French General Ferdinand Foch. Foch is brash and steadfast in his negotiations, giving German official Matthias Erzberger 72 hours to accept the terms of an armistice. Foch additionally stipulates that a ceasefire will not be enacted during the following 72 hours. These aggressive and even dismissive conditions proposed by Foch mirror the reckless position taken by Friedrichs. In a brilliant aside, the film takes a moment to linger on Foch's lamenting contemplation about the lack of fresh croissants available during yet another negotiation that will ultimately determine whether thousands of additional human lives are lost. This reality distortion is important because, yet again, it demonstrates that the film is wholly disinterested in suggesting the inherent goodness of one nation or another. Both Friedrichs and Foch are soldiers removed from the horrors of war, more interested in chest-puffing at the expense of their own countrymen. The score in All Quiet on the Western Front is minimalist yet eclectic in its execution. Militant marching percussion is heard alone throughout several scenes and lends a brutalist, imposing feel. Three-note tones with an almost electronic quality are heard throughout. Battles aren't highlighted by the sweeping orchestral swells typically heard in other war movies, where the action is triumphant and bombastic and the heroes are all quote-unquote true patriots. Either devoid of any music or punctuated by slow, melancholic strings and an eerie discord. The score here is used as a means of reminding us that we are watching horror unfold. A scene in the movie's second act sees Paul and Kaczynski, a soldier he befriends, stealing a goose from a local farmer. The two prepare the goose and share it with other soldiers from behind the front line. These men share a brief, ever-fleeting moment of levity as they laugh, sing, and eat together. Compellingly, the music playing during this scene is not uplifting or upbeat, as the characters in the scene suggest that it might be. It's instead sorrowful and lonely, a masterful sound design that colors the scene in a completely different hue. This is not a moment that the film wants us to celebrate. It's yet another tick in an unending list of injustices inflicted by and upon the people entangled in the war. The theft from a family struggling against a war-torn countryside. The pitiable celebration of starving and isolated soldiers far from home tearing into a hastily prepared goose as if this meal might be their last. All this enhances the film's central vision. There is nothing heroic about this world, nothing enviable about the station that these soldiers have found themselves in. At the end of the second act, the film recreates one of the original novel's most pivotal scenes. Paul finds himself in a mortar crater and faces a French soldier who is also knocked into the crater by a blast. Paul rushes the soldier and stabs him in the chest several times. For nearly 4 agonizing minutes, we see the man twitching and gurgling up blood as he slowly dies. Paul, in an attempt to quiet the man, stuffs dirt into his mouth, to worsening effect. Paul, seeing the other man's blood literally on his hands, makes a desperate but useless attempt to save his life. Paul then removes the now dead man's identifying papers from his breast pocket and sees that he has a family. He tucks the man's paperwork into his own jacket and makes a promise to the man, presumably to tell the man's wife what he had done after the war. Paul later unceremoniously loses the man's paperwork. The film does not afford its characters the mercy of atonement. The ending of the film deviates in a significant way from the novel's original conclusion. In the novel, Paul is killed on what is considered a remarkably peaceful day in October 1918. A report from the battlefield provides the status, "All quiet on the Western Front." In this adaptation, the armistice of November 11, 1918 is signed into existence and a conditional peace is achieved between German and Allied forces. With the official ceasefire scheduled at exactly 11 a.m., General Friedrichs orders a final attack to begin at 10:45 in a vain attempt to end the war with a pointless and entirely symbolic German victory. Protesters to this meaningless maneuver are immediately executed. We watch as battle-weary men march towards yet another potential demise. Notably, the film then cuts to 2 French soldiers lamenting over a fallen comrade who died before the war's end. These men share in their lost friend's wine and reminisce bitterly for a moment about the hell that they have endured on the Western Front, in a crucial moment that humanizes and gives a voice to an enemy that we as the audience are not given much perspective to throughout the film. Berger is sure to illustrate that just like Paul and his allies, the French brigade is staffed by normal, feeling human beings grueling against the war machine. The Germans arrive to the front, and Paul blankly cuts through several soldiers before being speared through the chest by a bayonet. He dies in the mud seconds before the official ceasefire is called. This deviation from the novel's original ending is a powerful demonstration of the arbitrary nature of war. Friedrich's ego-driven command for this final, pointless battle costs several men their lives and accomplishes nothing. Just before the credits roll, the film provides us with an outro card noting that by the end of the war, the front line had barely moved in spite of constant fighting for mere meters of ground at the expense of 3 million lives. The film doesn't end with any self-congratulation, no reprieve for the assaultive and dismal images painted. It ends with no fanfare. No, this film is unapologetic in its hopelessness. It describes a never-ending parade of death and destruction and then simply ends. The film has been described as staunchly anti-war, and this is firmly true. However, I believe that the film also serves to demystify war and the fantasy of violence. It demonstrates the hubris of warfare and the cost that it takes on humanity. It radiates pain and desolation and offers only a lesson in return that might be learned, if you're willing to listen. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and leave a like or comment before you go. It goes a long way towards helping me out. More film stuff to come.